All right, we're going to break down a really intense interview with the former acting director of ICE, Tom Homan. He makes some pretty explosive claims about the conflict that's heating up between his agency and protesters. So let's just dive right into what he had to say. And boom, right out of the gate, Homan drops this incredibly stark warning. He's basically saying the way we're all talking about this is pushing us toward actual physical violence. This quote really sets the tone for just how high stakes he believes the situation is. So, after a prediction like that, you have to ask, right? How does Homan justify his agency's actions? Well, he starts with the data. He's arguing that the numbers tell a very different story from what you might be seeing in the headlines. Let's take a look. Okay, the first big number he puts out there is this one, around 660,000. He says that's how many people his agency has physically removed from the United States. In his mind, this number is a key measure of ICE's effectiveness. But he doesn't just stop there. He breaks it down even further. And this is where his argument really comes into focus. He claims that, as you can see, a full 70% of all the people ICE arrests are individuals with criminal records. So he's framing this not just as immigration work, but as a public safety mission. And there it is. That's the core of his position. He's drawing a straight line from arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants, especially the ones he calls criminals, to making communities in America safer. That is his whole argument in a nutshell. Okay, so you have the data, but what does that actually look like on the ground, in the real world? Homan then pivots to Minneapolis, which he describes as a kind of flashpoint, where these policies and public protests are colliding head-on. And he makes it clear, they are not backing down. Homan claims his agency is actually doubling down. He says they're sending in more officers, and they've even set up a special team just to arrest people who interfere with what they're doing, people he calls agitators. And then he adds this detail. He wants those arrests televised. So you have to wonder, why such an aggressive response? Well, according to Homan, these aren't just random, spontaneous protests. He's alleging that there's a coordinated effort here, all being guided by what he calls an instruction manual. So where did he get this idea of an instruction manual? Well, in the interview, the claim is traced back to a New York Post article. And that article was reporting on an Instagram post from an anti-ICE group. So that's the specific source of this whole narrative. And the tactics that Homan claims are in this manual are, wow, incredibly specific. We're talking about instructions on how to physically stop an arrest in progress. Things like pushing an officer away from a suspect, swarming agents, even using cars to block them in. The way he frames it, these aren't protests, they're deliberate strategies for interference. And what's the legal view on this? Well, for Hodgman, it's not even a question. He says these aren't just acts of civil disobedience. He states very clearly that the advice being given describes actions that are, in his words, straight-up felonies, federal offenses. Okay, so this all feeds into Holman's next big point. For him, the physical fights on the street are directly tied to the political language being used. He's basically arguing that words have consequences, and that they're creating a really dangerous situation for his agents. He argues that the criticism coming from some politicians and activists has gone way beyond normal political debate. He feels it has escalated into something much more dangerous, something he calls hateful. And he gives some very specific examples of what he means. He points to people using words like Nazis and secret police, and even accusing his agency of murder. He argues this kind of language is meant to deliberately dehumanize his agents. And then, the conversation takes a turn. Homan makes it clear that for him, this isn't just some abstract political fight. He claims this rhetoric is having direct and, frankly, terrifying consequences for him and his family. The specific threat he describes, it's pretty chilling. Homan claims he got a threat that wasn't about killing him, but about killing his family so that he would have to suffer for the rest of his life. He's drawing a direct line from the political rhetoric to this very personal threat. So after laying all of that out, the claims of coordinated attacks, the personal threats, what happens next? Well, Homan closes by announcing that a major federal investigation is already happening. He says that the government doesn't see this as just random anger. They apparently believe it's a financed, coordinated effort to attack federal officers. And because of that, he says they're working with the Department of Justice on a deep dive investigation to, as he puts it, follow the money and find out who is funding these protest groups. And he leaves absolutely no doubt about what he thinks the outcome will be. He makes this final, very ominous promise. It's a pretty clear signal that he believes federal charges are on the way for the organizers. So there you have it. That's the argument as laid out by Tom Homan. It starts with data, moves to conflict on the streets, and ends with claims of coordinated, politically motivated attacks. It really lays bare one side of a very heated debate in this country, and it leaves us all with a pretty critical question. When protest and enforcement collide like this, where exactly is the line drawn? And who gets to draw it?